So welcome back guys to another one of my The 100 reviews, and we're going to be talking the 12th episode of the 7th and final season, otherwise titled The Stranger. Now last week's episode was all one character centric. It was all about Bellamy, Bellamy's journey, and Octavia. We didn't see much of Bardo or Sanctum. I mean, even the part about Bardo, that was majorly about Bellamy, about telling us this guy has definitely been indoctrinated. A lot of people argued after the episode, no, he's not indoctrinated, he's not brainwashed, the guy's just putting an act, he's got a plan. Well, he's got nothing. He doesn't have a plan to save his friends. He is a true believer in the shepherd, in his message, and that was pretty clear out of last week's episode. A lot of people as well did have a lot of objections about the writing for Bellamy in last week's episode. Like, no, you cannot write him in this fashion. Now, after viewing last week's episode as well as this week's episode, I'd respond to that with sorry guys, even though both the series name and my personal opinion as well see the series as something about a group rather than some lead character or a couple of characters, Clarke and Bellamy. I will still put an act here for a moment that I agree with you, they are the lead characters. Bellamy is one of the two lead characters of the series, and I will still say that does not necessarily mean that he's got to be an angel all the way, that he is basically immune to normal human stuff, normal human emotions, normal human stress, and normal human shit in general. But okay though, had to get that out of the way rather than discussing it repeatedly over the course of this video, every time we talked about Bellamy. So let's get started with the beginning of this episode. Now we start with Sanctum on this episode. We've got that moment out of the sneak peek, Murphy and Amori kneeling before Sheidheda. We've got Nikki and the convicts buying their way out of death by kneeling. Nelson, however, and the children of Gabriel, they choose to die rather than kneel, which honestly is a very stupid choice. I mean, make the right choice right now, survive to fight another day. Now what Nelson did over there sounds like it is the courageous thing to do. I'm not gonna kneel before a dictator, but at this point in time, with you being outnumbered, the people who do not agree with this guy and his ideologies, it was a smart move to actually live to be able to fight that other day, and Maury's advice exactly. All that Nelson did over there was pretty much reduce the number of people able to resist Sheidheda, able to fight back Sheidheda. Now, one of the better things about the beginning of this episode is we do know that Indra stands. I mean, she doesn't stand tall, but nonetheless, we know that she stands on her feet, and you're basically watching her over there, and all you're thinking is, I'm waiting for this one to make her next move, which she does, and kind of fails miserably, because she does lead Sheidheda to realizing what Murphy and Amori are doing over there, protecting the faithful, protecting Madi as well. And Sheidheda, he's got Murphy now, even though that very ending kind of tips the scales a little bit. We're gonna talk about the possibilities over my trailer breakdown video and my thoughts on what comes next. But okay, I think a good idea over here is to stick with Sanctum and then move to Bardo closer to the end of this video. Like stick with one arc and one story, talk about it, get it done with, and then jump to the other one. So I'm gonna talk Murphy as a leader, because that's one of my favorite things about this season. I mean, if you've been following my videos long enough, you know that Murphy is my favorite character on the series. He's had the most development since the first season up until this moment, and they've been doing that over so many seasons, so many episodes this season, leading to this point. A point where he is basically a hero and a leader, a point where he does all of that without hesitation, because Murphy used to hesitate with these things. He used to always choose himself first, then turn around and think, okay, that was the wrong choice, I'm gonna turn around and make the right one. Right now he's making the right choice, and right away, from the get-go. He even makes a couple of jokes about it over the course of this episode. But another thing that I've got to mention over here is that I'm starting to believe in that theory out there, that Amori is pregnant, because there are a lot of emotions there, and there is also a little bit of maternal instincts going down with her. So I'm thinking, yeah, that might be true. And if it were to be true, it would explain this massive change to Murphy, to his character. I mean, he's not even hesitating at being the hero. He's making the choice right away. I gotta be this kind of person because I want to be that kind of father. But there are two more Murphy moments though worthy of mentioning over here before we move to other characters in the Sanctum arc and then move to the major arc really of the episode, which is pretty much the Bardo arc. Speaking of those two moments, we've got that conversation with Nikki about Hatch. Nikki still seems like a disaster waiting to happen, like she's gonna break out of those restraints and she's gonna take over, and it's not gonna be good for the rest of the people down there. But then again, there is a part of me that believes that he got to her, Murphy got to her, even if partially. So she might end up being a soldier for the good side. She might end up actually working with Amori, now that they're trapped in the reactor surrounded by Sheidheda crew members, including Knight. Knight was a surprise on this episode because I thought Knight, by the way, was kind of changing there. Like he was thinking, this man is not the man to follow. My crew or not, Sheidheda crew or not, the champion of Sheidheda crew or not, he's not the man to follow. He wants to kill all those little children. I mean, he did give us that indication when Sheidheda told him to kill all the children because they would want revenge. He did give us the indication that he was kind of worried, he didn't like this. But then again, that does tell us about his character, a lot more about his character. I mean, he does feel that is wrong. He did feel at that moment that is wrong, but he is the kind of person who could silence his conscience, and that's not a good thing. These kind of characters, these kind of personalities are the kind of personalities that you do want to see dead before the end of this season. But circling back to Murphy though, that speech that he gave Nikki was pretty good, pretty solid. Like I said, I think he got to her, not totally, but partially got to her, and that's going to come into play in the future. But then there is the second moment I talked about, Sheidheda realizing Murphy is doing what he is doing, getting to the workshop. You've got to love Murphy over there. There was that inherent sarcasm in his statement, a reference also to a few episodes ago, that game of chess. In life that's called nothing to lose, in chess, I believe that's called a stalemate. But in terms of other characters in Sanctum, we've got Madi going all leader over there, a very good twist as well. Madi is showing a lot of growth over this season, character growth that is. First, there was the fear of being commander, then there was the drawings, then there was the fear of Sheidheda when he came back, then there was the attacking Sheidheda because he was about to kill Indra, and then on this episode, she's still a kid among kids, but she's got a lot of experience, and she's using that to lead all those kids, to calm them down as well. But here though is the last piece of information out of Sanctum, a piece that proves all the arguments that I've made against, the stone in Sanctum has been shut down argument. I've always responded to that kind of comment by stating we're just assuming over here, and there's a difference between theorizing and assuming, because this one, for instance, we were talking about it as a fact and then building theories on it when it wasn't a fact. There was and there is a major difference between the stone being shut down and the stone actually not being active at a certain point in time. Like no anomaly is up, so the stone is not really shut down, it's just inactive for a moment until someone clicks a few buttons on the Sanctum side or on some other side with a stone in order to activate an anomaly either from or to Sanctum, which is basically what happens at the end of this episode. So I thought I might talk about that for a moment before I move to Bardo. But that said though, it is about time we move to the Bardo side of the story, which is the side of the story that really occupies the majority of this episode, even though we're not going to be talking much about it except the major highlights. Now to get started, the highlights of the comments to my video last week were about two things. Bellamy has a plan, or the writing was bad, that's one aspect to those comments, and then there was the other aspect. He always knew, Bill Cadogan always knew that Clarke didn't have the flame, and that's why he was not surprised. And I'm sure the complaint this week is going to be about how his acting was so bad last week he did not look surprised at the end of the episode when Bellamy mentioned that. I think 1, he was in shock, and 2, he should not show. He is a leader talking to what he should perceive at that point is the enemy, because that enemy is trying to hinder his objective, trying to stop him from achieving whatever he's set to achieve, and at that point he shouldn't show much emotion. That's one thing, that's actually good writing and good acting. At the beginning of this episode, we get to know he's not just shocked, he is pissed. However though, he's not the kind of character that has this whole, I'm so angry I'm just gonna break stuff attitude to him. He's not the Hulk smash kind of character, he's more of the I'm calm, yet I'm so angry. You could tell I'm angry, but I'm not just gonna flip and go crazy. I've talked about the other argument though, the Bellamy argument or multiple arguments at the beginning of this video, so I'm not gonna revisit them again over here. I'm gonna talk though about the multiple reasons that made it easier for them to get to Bellamy, as opposed to what they try to do with Hope, Octavia, Dioza, and Echo and totally failed, because over here what they did with Bellamy was completely different. First of all, if it was entirely a simulation or partially a simulation, they did it in such a way that he didn't know it was a simulation, so they totally played him. On the other hand, with the other 4, they did know they were going into simulations every single time. The Ender's methodology versus the Bill Cadogan methodology as well kind of varies over here. I mean, Bellamy, even though very twisted at this moment, he still believes in all those things. Family, friends, he wants to protect them, he cares for them, he hates that they hate him. And in the meanwhile, Cadogan is not trying to erase all of that, he's not trying to stop all that emotion, but instead he's using it to his own advantage. He's trying to show Bellamy sympathy. It's been too long for me, and I'm the shepherd. I'm the god that says he's not a god, but I'm still the false god that you believe in, and it's still so difficult for me. I do it with so much difficulty after all these years. I've got to say though, while the shepherd is basically using this to his advantage, I think this is going to be Bellamy's redeeming quality, that he still cares. Man, before it's too late, he's going to be able to snap out of this just because of this trait, because of the fact that they never were able or never will be able to erase that love that he's got for all of these people, and especially Octavia. But okay though, we've got more highlights on this episode. We've got the mention of Reese by none other than Bill Cadogan. He went searching for the flame. I never saw him again, which answers half of our question. Reese never reunited with his father. He's nowhere as well close to Bardo or Etheria or anywhere that Second Dawn has access to. But however, he still might be somewhere out there amongst what remains of the Grounders, his lineage being part of it all, not necessarily Reese himself, possibly making someone like Sheidheda into a descendant or a follower. Okay, let me explain how. I know a lot of people are going, Sheidheda is possibly Reese. That is not true. Doing the math on time, I would say Sheidheda is definitely not Reese. Like the Sheidheda that we saw in that flame, the Sheidheda that Indra, as a child, who's not so old by the way at this point, watched her mother kneel to the original version of the character. I wouldn't think he could be Reese. I mean, age-wise he couldn't. That would mean that if there's any connection between Sheidheda and Reese, it's one of two connections. Number one, Sheidheda could actually be a descendant of Reese, or number two, the relationship between the two is about the crew they belong to. So Sheidheda crew could be something that was founded by Reese. Now there are two reasons as well I'm starting to believe more and more in this possibility. The first of these two reasons is how the episode ended, like both stories are basically starting to overlap, and number two, the mention of Reese and the fact that he might be able to get some closure from finding the flame about what happened to Reese if Calliope killed him. I think that's either about finding how Reese plays into all of this, or the possibility that they're just trying to market the prequel. Like here's basically another piece of information that's gonna get you all worked up, wanting to watch that prequel. Start that hashtag, we want the 100 prequel. But okay, I don't want to dwell on this for too long. Bellamy is selling his friends to Bill Cadogan. His belief is more important to him than these people, even though he still loves these people, so it's kind of a struggle within. You could also tell that he is okay with the resolution at the very end, because they're safe and they're gonna get the flame as well, like Bill Cadogan in Second Dawn, and that works for him. But we also have three possibilities as to how this would work, finding the code that Bill Cadogan is after. So number one, we have the possibility of fixing the flame, and I don't think that's gonna work by the way. Number two, we've got the possibility that they've been dangling for us for so many episodes now. Madi's drawing all these drawings, so she must know what the key is. And finally, there is number three, the possibility I've been mentioning on so many videos, and surprisingly a lot of people have been agreeing with me on, which is Sheidheda, because Sheidheda does mention over here that he remembers seeing that stone when he had the flame on him, like in the memories of other commanders. So the possibility does exist that this guy has the code, which makes it even more complicated and makes a lot of sense, trying to overlap both arcs as at the end of this episode. One of the things I did like about what Bellamy explained to Clarke and Octavia on this episode, being there on Etheria talking about that entire experience, I think that pretty much sums up what I tried to explain in last week's review. I mean, you're there, you're in a bad situation, you think there's no getting out of it, so you decide to try anything. You're gonna pray to anything, even though you don't believe in it, and suddenly that one prayer to that one false god does work. In this case, it's the shepherd. In this case, it is Bill Cadogan, and you start believing, because he saves you, he delivers you out of this situation, and you just stop denying what he and his followers claim he is, even though he's really not. On another note though, and speaking of Clarke, I did love the good old comeback, go float yourself, and of course the fact that Clarke calls Bellamy her best friend. That is always music to my ears. The lack of a Bellarke thing going on is always music to my ears. I'd really end up hating the ending of the series if it were to be about that regular TV and movie trope. You know, the two lead characters, they end up kissing and making out by the end of the season or the end of the series. I don't want that to happen. But okay though, before we move on to the ending of this episode, I did like the conversation between Octavia and Clarke, like finally understanding Clarke, one having Madi and the other having hope. In the overall, they've both made mistakes. In the overall, they've both kinda led similar lives in a way, in certain aspects, not in all aspects. But Octavia over here kinda sees the similarities that they both bear to one another when put in comparison with one another. The other thing worthy of mentioning over here is we could hate Hope for her stupid choices, for her mistakes, for her childishness, but you gotta feel for her on this episode. I mean, the loss of the father figure in her life and her guilt over it, then the loss of her mother because she did the opposite of what cost her father, yet she loses her. I do think as well that conversation between her and Jordan was like the perfect goodbye moment to Dioza that the series needed to give for Dioza. Now, there's the part about Jordan in the middle of all of this, and this conversation in specific, that I wanted to discuss on this video, but I'm gonna leave it for the trailer breakdown and theory video, because this one is already too long, so I'm gonna jump to that ending of the episode. Now, Clarke makes a deal with Bill Cadogan. You know, I'm gonna take you to where I buried the flame in return for you releasing my friends, freeing my friends. Now, the Shepherd, on the other hand, Bill Cadogan, does play a dirty game, trying to make sure that he's got some leverage. He does free her friends except for Raven and Gabriel, and that makes a lot of sense to me because he's got to have some leverage. But the leverage though is not really Raven and Gabriel, the leverage is the rest of the team, the ones that he sent somewhere that we do not know. However, that's probably where Gaia is. It's not going to be Skyring, it's not going to be Etheria, it's going to be that one last planet that we have not seen yet. And that's probably where Gaia is, and that means that we're getting to see Gaia pretty soon, especially that she did get mentioned on this episode by both Sheidheda and Night. But okay though, Raven is left behind because she's possibly going to be used to Bill Cadogan, and she's the only one that could free them if she were with the team. She knows how to operate the stone. I'm thinking Gabriel as well has been left behind because of his brain, because he probably could be the one to fix the flame once they retrieve it. Of course, Clarke is left behind because of the obvious reasons, and finally Bellamy is left behind because he's now one of the disciples, one of the believers in the greatness and the godliness of the Shepherd. Now this though is where the stories overlap. The stone is in Sheidheda's room. It's never really been shut down, as I did repeatedly argue against everyone who said it was shut down. It was just that the anomaly was inactive in Sanctum at that point. That's all there was to it. So they activate the anomaly, they pass through, they get from Sanctum to there. Clarke is absolutely taken by this situation, like she doesn't know that Russel is Sheidheda, but she sees Russel with one eye now, and the man's on a throne made of skulls. Not exactly the Iron Throne from Game of Thrones, but you could see where they probably got the inspiration for that very moment. Now that said, I think that the title of the episode, The Stranger, refers mostly to Bellamy. You know, the change that happened to Bellamy. He's a stranger to all of these guys. He's not the same Bellamy that they knew. I give this episode a rating of 8.5 out of 10. It's moved this story pretty decently. It's not a filler episode. This season so far, there are no filler episodes really, no matter what anyone says. I think that they're developing the story, they're advancing the story pretty well, and not at either a very slow or a very fast pace. This is not my favorite episode of the season, but it is definitely leading up to better events, to the wrapping up of the season. Feels very bad really, because we don't want the series to be over, yet we do want to know what's going to happen in the end and how this is all going to wrap up. But do let me know in the comments down below what you thought of this episode. How do you rate it? How do you expect things are gonna go from here? Let me know as well if you did like this video by dropping it one of those much appreciated likes, subscribing to this channel, and make sure while you're at it to enable notifications in order to get updates whenever I upload a new video, publish a new community post, or start a new live stream. But until the next time that you tune in for another one of my videos, thank you so much for tuning in to this review. Stay safe and have a great day.